Hi, my name is Laura McGrath, and my family and I have been caring for our son with special needs for over a decade. I'm doing this series of short videos to help support other families who might be caring for a loved one with special needs, to try to give you some information and show you some of the things we've learned along the way. I want to start out by saying, of course, I'm not a medical professional, so if any of the ideas in this video or any others are interesting to you or you want to explore them, please make sure that you run them by your healthcare practitioner. Today we're starting with a Blenderize diet because I have had so many questions from parents of children with special needs who have a feeding tube about how to get started with a Blenderize diet. And so I'm going to answer some questions that I typically get from people and then show you a video of how we blend our son's food so that you have an idea about how the process works. The first question is, what is a Blenderize diet? So a Blenderize diet is just simply a diet of whole foods that's put through a blender, made into a very thin puree about the same consistency as formula that you can feed your loved one through a feeding tube. There are many reasons why someone might want to do this. The first is that there have been many studies, and I'll link to those below, that show that a Blenderize diet can be more optimal for someone with a feeding tube. The second reason is when someone gets a feeding tube and they're typically formula fed, family may feel like they're missing out on being able to feed their child foods that are traditional in their family or their culture, and creating a Blenderize diet for your child really allows them to participate in some of those foods that are important to your family. The second thing is that Blenderize diets can be more well tolerated than formula, and so for that reason, many people are interested or curious and want to explore more about a Blenderize diet. So another question I get is, how much time does it take to make a Blenderize diet? The answer is, once you get some basic equipment and run through these steps a couple of times, it doesn't take much time. It takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes to make a day's worth of food, and that's really the time it takes to pack a typical child's lunch. So it's really not that much time once you know what you're doing. I'm going to run through a lot of steps in this video, and don't get overwhelmed by the steps. There are a lot of them, but I'm also going to include a full breakdown of all of the steps below so that you don't have to feel intimidated or write anything down. You can just kind of follow along with the video. And then if you decide you want to try this on your own at some point, you can use the steps that I've written down for you. The next question I get is, what equipment do I need? So the most important thing when you Blenderize food is that you need the food to become liquefied, even if it's a texture like a meat or fruit with the skin or vegetables. You want all of that food to be liquefied so it does not clog the feeding tube. We personally use a Vitamix Classic Series 5200. BlendTech is another type of blender that people do use for blended food. I'm not as familiar with the BlendTech. I'm very familiar with the Vitamix, and we have had great luck with our Vitamix. I'm going to link below to the Vitamix website. You can get deals on Vitamixes either by buying a refurbished Vitamix. You can go to the Vitamix website, and sometimes they offer a discount based on financial need. Currently that program is on hold, but you might want to check back to the site. You can also go on your local Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. People sell these blenders on these sites, and so you might be able to get a deal. In fact, we bought one off of one of those websites. It was a college student who had won a Vitamix in a raffle and was never going to use it, and we ended up getting it for half price. What I will say about the Vitamix is it's very easy to use. It's very powerful. It has a 2-horsepower motor, which is really important to be able to liquefy food, and ours has lasted almost 9 years. Okay, so now we're going to talk about containers. We tend to use plastic bags, Ziploc quart bags for our food because we make food and freeze it, just because that's what works the best for our family. We also have a selection of stainless steel canister containers that we use from time to time when we're feeding our son the fresh food. Other families have used things like mason jars or canning jars. Really any container that works for your family is fine. And then I always use a Sharpie to label the food, particularly if you're making more than one day's food, because that way you know what it is and when you made it. Before we get started, I just want to mention that if you're the caregiver of someone with a feeding tube and you just feel like this is not something you have time to do, it may not be something that you can afford to do right now because the blender is somewhat of an expense to start, I would encourage you to watch the video anyway, just so you have the information, and at a time when you might have the ability to blend food or the ability to get the blender to blend food, you'll have some idea of what the process is all about. Okay, so now we're gonna get started with blending the food. And again, don't worry about writing down any of these steps. Don't worry about not following along. I'm just filming the blending process real time so that you get a sense of the amount of time that it takes, but I've included all the steps below, so you just need to follow those steps if you decide to move forward with your own blended diet. Okay, so you'll see that we have the picture from the Vitamix 5200 series on the food scale zeroed out, and you'll see a variety of foods that we're including in this simple blend. I'll go more into detail about what we put in our blends in a second part to this video. The first thing we add is protein. We measure it out on a food scale based on our son's age and size. Next, we add various fruits and vegetables. Next, we add fat, here in the form of coconut milk, and a few additional items to meet our son's specific nutritional goals. Next, we add the blending liquid. In this case, we're using apple juice. You want to fill it up about 2/3 of the way, or at about the 40-ounce mark on a 64-ounce pitcher. Now we place the pitcher on the mixer. The user interface has 3 controls: the left, middle, and right. First, you flip the on-off button, then you move the middle dial very slowly until you can see the blend consistently blending throughout the blender. If you don't see that consistent movement, you'll want to stop and add a little bit more liquid. We turn the variable speed up until we can see consistent movement throughout the entire pitcher. And then you want to go from variable to high on the far left toggle. When you do this, again, you should see the food moving quickly through the entire pitcher. And when you look down through the top of the lid, you should see what's called the funnel. That means that the food is blending consistently and that all the chunks are being liquefied. You always want to keep your hand on the lid so that you don't end up with food spilling out of the top of the pitcher. Then you want to move the dial from high to variable, and you want to turn the variable knob slowly down. You want to turn the machine off and then on again. off and on several times, and that gets the air out of the blended mix. You can see when we stop, the air bubbles come to the surface. It's important to get the air out of the blended food so that it doesn't go in your loved one's stomach. Now you can see we're done with our blend. The blend has a very consistent texture. It's smooth with no lumps or bumps, and we pour it into whatever container is convenient for us and whatever purpose we're using the food for. For example, we're freezing our food, so we're adding it to these plastic bags to throw in our freezer. So now you've seen Blended Diet in action. I hope this video was helpful for you. If you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more videos like this, please hit subscribe. I'm going to try to post a few more on different topics. And I do have a contact email and my website. So if there's any topics that you want to cover, anything you're curious about, I might be able to do a video on that and give you some support there. So thanks again for listening. Have a great day.